Afternoon, everyone. We've had a bit of a change in musical chairs, as you'll see. So we're doing some things a bit differently today. We're starting off about the exit from lockdown's framework document that we have published today, and then that will be with Nikki and myself, and then Gavin will be saying a few words, followed by Paul and Rory. So without further ado, I think we'll start by focusing on the exit from lockdown strategy. This is going to be a bit like pre-pandemic days when Nikki and I used to have a double act when we used to go out talking about joint needs assessments and what have you. So we're going to be doing a bit of a double act to go through what this document is about and how we see ourselves easing out of lockdown over the coming weeks. I'm going to just give a few details at the beginning, covering off the context of why we're doing this. Nikki will look at the evidence and what that has been informing the approach we've taken. We're then going to talk through the different phases together so people can get an idea of what they mean and the timings, and then I'll give a few closing comments before handing over to Gavin. So, without further ado, if we can go into the exit from lockdown and the next slide, please. So, there are four aims to the framework. The first, obviously, is mitigating and minimising the impact of COVID-19, but also looking at protecting and preserving life generally, minimising economic, social, environmental impact, and promoting restoration to normality as soon as possible. So basically what we're looking at is considering getting business, social, cultural, recreational activity up and running alongside the need to protect the island from COVID-19 and setting out how we do that through a series of transitional measures. It's really important to emphasise here that we're taking that local perspective, taking into account our specific needs. So yes, we have been looking about what's going on in the rest of the world, seeing what's worked, what people are considering, but this is very much focused on our community, what will work for us. And also, people need to understand here, this is an iterative document. It will change over time. It will change as we have new evidence, and circumstances change. And we'll also be adding to it because within the document at the moment, it doesn't go through how schools will go back. That is a very difficult area to look at. A lot of planning is needed over this, and that will be slotted in as we go through and we work up the document more and more. And also in relation to the health services and how we bring things back to normal, how we introduce back elective surgery and other parts of the service which have been put on hold over this particular moment in time. However, what we've produced is what we know now. It's based on the evidence that we have now. And I think, as we've said all along, we have taken a very cautious and conservative approach. So please bear that in mind when you see what we're proposing, and particularly the timings. Some of the timings, for some people, they might think that's too long. But that's because we are taking a cautious approach, and we'll explain more later about how that might change over time, that the timings that we're giving might not be what we finally get. So that's my background, and I will now hand over to Nikki.
So first of all, before we go into our decision making, just to give you our daily update. So we remain on 252 positive cases. So we've now had no new positives. This is our 5th consecutive day of no new positives. So really encouraging from that perspective. We are down to 16 active cases. So again, down from in the 20s down to 16, really encouraging as well. And we now have a total of 222 people who've recovered. The number of deaths remains on 13, so very encouraging that everything seems to be progressing in the right direction. What I'm going to show you now is a summary, and I know some of you will be familiar with this graph, but a summary of the graph that we present with regard to our overall COVID activity. So if you look at the graph, the top line, the maroon line, is our total our total number of cases. And as you can see, that was initially on a trajectory up and now has plateaued off nicely. So also going up are cumulative recoveries. And you can see how the total case and cumulative recoveries, the orange is the cumulative recoveries, those two lines are now coming together. Decreasing, going downwards, is our active cases. That's the green line. Again, really encouraging how you can see our active cases have come down completely. So the picture that we're seeing with a stabilization, no further deaths, a decrease in the number of active cases, an increase in the recovered cases, and a stabilization of our total number of cases is a really positive picture as we face our easing of lockdown. So what we wanted to pause today is discuss with you and outline is what has informed our decision making. Now, I've spoken to you for some time about our attributable cases. Now, attributable cases have been really important to us because knowing where the infection comes from enables us to put the appropriate strategy in place to control that infection. So if you looked in early days, travel was by far our most important sector where we got our infections from. So most of the infections were imported. As we brought in our travel restrictions and so on, that group dramatically declined and now only accounts for 19% of our total. We've spoken about the care home, both residents and care home workers, and that accounts for about 40% of our total number of cases. We are in a much better place with regard to the care homes, and things are improving there literally day by day. So that's really encouraging. Our most important slice of the pie, so to speak, now are the contacts of known cases. Now that's really positive because these are people that we've identified as being at risk, we've put them into quarantine, and we test them when they become symptomatic. So these are people that we're watching really carefully. So identifying most of our cases through contacts of a known case is a positive sign. Now the group that I watch most carefully are the cases of unexplained community seeding. Those are the groups that worry me most because these are cases that just pop up in the community that we haven't got any explanation as to where they came from. And that now accounts for 12% of cases. And the last case of definite community seeding we had was on the 21st of this month, with a possible case occurring about 10 days later. So we're not sure about the case 10 days later. We think it might be linked to another issue that we're dealing with, but the last definite case was on the 21st of April. So really, really positive from that perspective. So if we then also look at the next graph, which is our modelling graph, and with our modelling graph, there are two dotted lines that I'd like you to focus on. The first is the grey dotted line, and the second is the amber dotted line. Now, if you look at the cases, we detected our first case on the 9th of March, and the grey line follows the initial cases that occurred after that and showed what would have happened if we'd done absolutely nothing. So that's what would have happened to the number of cases. So you can see an exponential increase in the number of cases. If you move along to the amber dotted line, what you see there is what happens when you bring in some social distancing measures. So that includes the social distancing 2 meters apart within the community, some school closures, but not a full lockdown. So if you move along on that graph and you look at the 21st, you can see the trajectory that we were following with normal social distancing measures on the 25th. Now, after we went into lockdown, the incubation period of the virus is about 5 to 7 days. So if you move along 5 to 7 days, what you see is that blue line flattening down. Now, the blue and green lines might seem confusing. The green lines are individual cases. The blue lines are our 5-day moving model. So what we do is we amalgamate 5 days of cases together because they're small numbers, and that flattens out the curve and enables us to see trends. So what you see from our 5-day moving model, which is the blue line, you see that dramatic flattening and squashing of the curve. So that shows us what happens if we'd done nothing with the grey line, just brought in some social distancing measures, the amber dotted line, but then shows the effect and the impact that lockdown has had on the prevalence of the virus within our community. So the other thing that informed our decision making was our contact tracing process. And I don't think it's any secret to you what a fan I am of test, contact trace and quarantine. I think I must have said this to you hundreds of times. But if you look at when lockdown happened, and it's marked on the graph, is prior to lockdown, the average number of contacts per case was in the region of 20 contacts per case. And what you see moving 5-7 days on from lockdown happening, so again allowing for that incubation period of the virus, you see a dramatic decrease in the number of contacts per cases. So down to round about 5 contacts per case now, obviously some variation there. So again, that's hugely important, because if one person has 20-30 contacts, the chance of them transmitting the virus is so much greater. Whereas if they have 5 or less contacts, again, you're cutting off those transmission events. So really, really important. So when we were exiting lockdown safely, there were things that we thought we really had to consider carefully. The one is that we didn't want to lose the gains that we had achieved. These are hard-fought gains. The community's worked with us, but there has been a considerable sacrifice that the community has made to achieve these gains. So that's really important. The other thing I want to be quite open and transparent about from the start is no exit from lockdown is risk-free. There's always going to be a risk as we progress, but what we're looking at is risk reduction. And so we're not looking at risk elimination, but we're looking at quite a dramatic risk reduction if we bring it in a phased way. The backbone of our public health response is our test, trace and quarantine, but Deputy Salisbury and Deputy St Pierre are going to talk about a bit later, is the enhanced bailiwick testing programme, which we're also hoping to bring online, which is an extremely exciting, very ambitious programme. So I'm going to now I think this is me still. So the exit plan has been planned over 6 phases. Now, it is a conservative approach, and what we've said is we've put in numbers between the phases, but these are not tablets of stone. We haven't said that this is a strategy and this is what we're going to do, this is our roadmap. What we've said is this is a framework, and as evidence comes to play, we might in fact shorten some of those times. But what we wanted to do is put something out that we thought could realistically be achieved, and actually we could probably do better than that. So it's really, again, setting out a basic framework for us to progress. Now, what we've done is we've tried to have adaptive triggers, so release triggers where we go forward, and adaptive triggers, which means that we progress backwards. And those will then inform how we move forwards and how we move backwards. And we thought, again, these are not perfect, and we've spent hours looking globally at what's been done, looking at what other people are doing, looking at whether we should model it in an R value, whether we should be looking at incubation periods of the virus, exactly what we should be looking at. And we came up with indicators that we felt were relevant for us. So I think you recall that when we went into lockdown, one of the things was that we had a case of unexplained community transmission. And when you look at the history of what was going to happen with that unexplained community transmission, we were on a trajectory upwards then. So what we're looking to see is either stable or decreasing cases of unexplained community transmission, so an unexplained community source. And as I said, we really are optimistic that we're starting to see a dramatic decrease of those. Stable or decreasing hospital admissions. I think I've spoken to you all before about sense checking all of our figures. So if we've got very little in the community, is that translated to a similar low level of activity in the hospital? So again, looking at what's going on within our hospital. No new clusters in the community that pose a risk for ongoing transmission. So if I get a cluster of 2 or 3 people, I know exactly where it came from, and yes, 3 people are infected, but I'm happy that that's contained. I'm less worried about a cluster that I can't explain, that's spreading all over the place, that we're not sure what's happening with. So it's where we think there's that risk of ongoing community transmission. And finally, if we think that there is no public compliance and everyone is just mixing as they want to, we're seeing increasing numbers of the virus, that would be another reason for us to go backwards. From our point of view, we don't think the latter thing that I've discussed is going to be an issue because we've had such great compliance. So that was trying to put some evidence as to why what we'd use to go forwards and what we'd use to go backwards. And we've tried to then put numbers on that for each stage. But you'll have to forgive us if we change our mind with regard to the numbers, because if new evidence occurs, we of course will review what we do. And I do think it is you now, Heidi.
Thanks, Nikki. As you'll have seen from the earlier slide, we've got 6 phases. We're in phase 2. We've started these off from lockdown. We know that we've got limited businesses out there working with following social distancing guidelines and hygiene rules. We've talked about the household bubbles being extended and the expansion of how exercise can be undertaken. And we're saying, and as Nikki has given the caveats there, 4 weeks. So we're a week and a half into that. So in theory, we could, in 2.5 weeks, might even be sooner, move on to phase 3. So, phase 3. Thank you. So phase 3 is the start of, hopefully, takeaways again. Yes, this wasn't me that made that happen, but we will be able to have takeaways again. Businesses that are currently operating might be able to work more back to normal than they are at the moment. We're looking at having libraries, museums opening, places of worship opening, but not for congregations, more for private prayer, and hopefully the expansion of who can attend funerals and how funerals can be undertaken. Nikki, do you want to do the social bit?
Yeah, so during that time, we're also looking at expanding our social bubble. So adding more households to the bubble, and we can work out how many more households you can add to the bubble at that stage. So again, instead of opening everything up, we're saying, well, maybe another couple of households can come into your bubble, and your bubble becomes a bigger household bubble. And that just starts increasing social connectivity. One of the things that has impressed me during this time is how important we value social connectivity as part of our island life. And I think that's really important. And so, again, it's trying to design an exit strategy that takes into account what's important for islanders and not is just, well, let's do this and this, but actually see what people want. And I think with the duration again, what we've said is that it can go backwards and forwards. So we've said the duration is 8 weeks, but actually if we do very well in this phase, we could actually count back those 8 weeks. If we have no community transmission, we can then use those weeks to count forward into that stage. So again, it will then concertina the time between the 2 stages. And I think that's really important that we're flexible with regard to that.
Thanks, Nikki. So yeah, that's in 2.5 weeks' time. I know we've heard various comments about the extended bubble. There was a lot of people living on their own and with grandparents, single set of grandparents being able to see their grandchildren. We do understand issues over having 2 sets of grandchildren on island and having to choose. But this is for a short period of time, and we're doing this in a controlled way so we can manage that risk, as Nikki mentioned. So, phase 4, well, this is a big change. This is where we get retail, hospitality, beauticians, hairdressers, starting to operate under strict guidance and real social distancing rules where applicable. Gyms, pools, and restaurants. So we'll be think about restaurants might have to spread out tables more in terms of how they can operate. But that we will be seeing so many more business being able to operate now. And Nikki, on the social side?
Again, it's that social connectivity, expanding our household bubbles even further, so perhaps 5 or more bubbles at this stage. So again, each time the number of people that you're including in your bubble is increasing, and that'll hopefully help as we come up to holiday times and people when people are wanting to socialise more with the lovely weather. So I think that's really important. The duration of the time, at this stage, because the difference between 4 and 5 weeks, we've put a fixed 8 weeks, but should our measures exceed what we think, then we may well revise that down. So it'll all depend on what happens over that period of time, and particularly with our expanding testing programme. So that may provide us with some very useful information. Thank
you. And then we get to phase 5, which basically is the Berwick bubble. So as far as possible, it'll be business back to normal. There will still be social distancing rules, but basically this is where we can operate as normally as we can and having regard to the virus in the community. Now, at this point in time, the travel advice won't have changed. It will still be travel that is essential and expectation of there being 2 weeks isolation. But that is where we are now. these things might change. We might have evidence that it's not necessary to have 2 weeks isolation, but also if things are more favourable amongst our neighbouring jurisdictions, then we might be able to do things differently. We might be able to ease that off or change how we do that in considering isolation, whether it's necessary, and who we might want to expand into the bubble. And so that will lead us, that's for 4 weeks, we're saying now, but again, as Nikki has said, if we get our enhanced testing in place and the evidence is good, it could be sooner than that. And that then leads us to phase 6, when we can't say when that will be. It might be when we have a vaccine. It might not be. It might be, as we were saying, I just said, it might be because our neighbours are doing a great job as well. And we can say, right, we haven't got those risks. We can afford now to open up. And I don't know if Nikki, you've got anything else to add on that?
No, other than it'll be the risk profile of our neighbours. So obviously we'd like to get a vaccine as soon as we can, and we are engaging with the UK with regard to that. So I think that's really important. But if the risk profile goes down in the surrounding areas, we may well relook at that. So it's all about what the risk is to the bailiwick and balancing the risk of that with the other risks of isolation. So I think that's the most important.
Thanks, Nikki. So that is basically the overview of the exit from lockdown framework. As I said, we've mentioned this quite a lot, and I'll say it again. If we expand our testing, which is what we're planning to do, and Gavin will say more about that in a minute, to say covering care homes, health and care workers, schools, colleges, we may be able to really concertina that right down. And that is one of the strategies that we've got in making things work faster. So, but this is where we are now. I can't emphasise more. This is from all the evidence that we have now, and we are where we'd say, is it perfect? No. Do we have all the answers? No. But lockdown was simple. I mean, that was just a case of doing one thing overnight. That was simple, and I think there was a good analogy made the other day about how lockdown was like the hammer, where we squashed the infection, squashed that spread of infection, so our medical services could cope, and so we weren't overrun. And the analogy was that the easing from lockdown is like a dance, and how we have to learn that dance and have to learn how we live with the virus within our community. And we are saying that, we might not get the steps right immediately. We might have to stop again and go back a bit and just learn as we're going along. So it is much harder than lockdown, but also it's important to say it is a dance with two partners. So what we've done today is highlight their exit framework, but there's also a recovery plan that goes alongside that. And I think it's important to realise we both are needed for the future. And both of those will go to the states, and our political representatives will be allowed to debate them in due course. So I think understanding this isn't a document that sits alone, and it's something for the whole states to work around. But finally, I would like to say how we really would welcome feedback from the community for this. We know we haven't got all the answers. We haven't a blueprint to follow. We have a blank sheet of paper. There's very little evidence to work from about what the rest of the world's doing. The rest of the world is in the same position as us. We are easing from lockdown earlier than many other jurisdictions too. So we've got very little to follow on. So we're saying we haven't got the answers. We do welcome feedback, as always. We're getting some really excellent ideas, people trying to help and support us. And that's been very much at the heart of what we've been doing over these last few weeks. The whole Guernsey Together thing has worked really well. This is a living document. So as much as we have put this together today, and this is a document that is led by the Committee for Health and Social Care, this is a community document. It's a living document which will change over time and needs to change over time with the evidence and the work that Nikki does and the expanded testing we do. So we really do welcome the whole community coming, giving us their ideas and helping us on that journey out of lockdown. So that's the first part of the conference today, and I'm going to move on to Gavin.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Heidi. I shall be relatively brief. One thing that really is worth emphasising, and Heidi has done it several times, is how there will be more detail that will need to follow. Education has been one of the things that we've identified that clearly needs to dovetail with this exit strategy, and that is being worked on, and further information on that will follow in due course. The other thing is, if you look at the document, which is online, you will see that in relation to Phase 2, there is a section which deals with what does Phase 2 mean to me. That section will need to be developed for each of the phases as we approach them. So again, don't be surprised to see that's missing. That is the kind of additional detail that Heidi is talking about. Nikki, I'm just wondering if you can go back to your slide with the grey dotted line. One of the things that is in the detailed strategy that's been released today is some of the planning assumptions that informed the decision making in relation to going into the lockdown, and these are in the document for the first time and in the public domain for the first time, and I think really shows the potential risk to the community that was being that we were being seeking to manage with the strategy that we have adopted since mid March. So this is. I think is actually the one before. Is it? No. Is it the one that shows the? No. And again, it's all right. You've got the one that showed the progression with no mitigation.
It's that one there.
It is that one. So I'm sorry, I can't see the dots from here. Sorry. So the first line that Nikki mentioned is the grey dotted line. So this was the trajectory we were on before any measures were taken, as you can see there. And where that would have taken us on the planning assumptions is that actually 50,000 members of our community would have suffered the experience of the virus. And of those, we could have expected around about 1,800 additional deaths, so-called excess deaths. So that's 1.8% of the population. And the consequence of that clearly would have been that our critical care unit would have been overwhelmed within 2 weeks. We would have run out of the storage for managing those that had died. So that just gives you the scale of the threat that we were seeking to mitigate and manage through the measures that have been taken. So I think it's very easy as we talk about coming out of exit, and as we see the success in not only so-called flattening the curve, we have clearly squashed the curve, as this graph shows. I think it'll be very easy to become complacent, and we need to constantly address that question of complacency. And one of the issues is in relation to testing. Both Nikki and Heidi have mentioned this, the expansion of our testing regime and capacity that will and what role that will play in our exit strategy. The so-called BETS, it's been given an acronym, Bailiwick Extended Testing System, will increase our capacity from 96 extractions in 48 extractions in 3 hours to 96 in 90 minutes. So that gives you a clue, a sign of how much additional capacity that produces. So it would be effectively 400 a day, which the public health and the pathology team would be able to deal with. There's a really good news story here as well. You will recall that we had the COVID-19 response appeal that members of the public have contributed to. It's currently reached 88,000. That has been used to significantly fund the piece of kit which was ordered yesterday. And so, again, a huge thank you to the community that have enabled that decision to be taken, and enabled that decision to be taken so much more quickly than perhaps would otherwise have been the case. And we've also absolutely cut through all the normal red tape and process that would happen with the kind of procurement that we're talking about here. because we regard this as being so critical to the next stage. And again, Nikki can talk more about what that piece of kit actually will mean for us. There are a couple of other things I'm going to pick up as we go through the conference, but that's enough from me for now. We're going to go to Paul and then to the Head of Law Enforcement. So, Chief Executive.
Yes, thank you. I'll carry on with that theme around the tracing elements, because it's really important to our success. Many of you, I think, have heard on the news that the UK are currently trialling a track and trace application in the Isle of Wight. Similar apps are also in development across other jurisdictions. So I just want to take just a few moments to explain our position on track and trace and our views on an application for the bailiwick. Track and trace apps are based basically upon 4 components of testing, both reactive and proactive, contact tracing and automation. So that is helping us to make sure that all the data is brought together. And lastly, targeting. So making sure all those who need to be are proactively identified for testing. As it stands, we are currently managing all these elements within our existing processes. Some of these capabilities cannot be replicated in many other jurisdictions, primarily due to their size, but also due to some of the unique capabilities we've already developed in the bailiwick. It is important that we make appropriate responses for the bailiwick and maximise where we have the advantage. We are already testing efficiently those displaying symptoms and looking to increase our capacity so that we can introduce proactive testing, so testing areas we might identify as being a higher risk. We are also contact tracing highly efficiently thanks to the professional efforts of the public health team. This has been pivotal in our success to date. The size of our bailiwick enables us to do this manually where this could be more difficult elsewhere. This gives us a higher level of accuracy than automated option of an app and avoids the risk of false positives. What is great news is that we've already built the first phase of new technology that will do the majority of our back-end automation, bringing together all the systems and sending out automated messages where this is suitable. And as mentioned earlier, we're increasing our testing capability by the purchase of the additional testing equipment. Lastly, in working with public health, we're starting to use the e-census, which is again unique and developed for Guernsey, to start intelligent targeting for proactive testing. So what does this mean? This involves identifying high-risk areas, for example, multi-occupancy accommodation that tend to have larger household groupings, often with multiple face-to-face contact type work. These high-risk areas can be called for testing rather than monitoring the whole community. And again, as we move the faces, might help to seek and support business in opening up to more near normal activities. We're already in a good position. However, all this said, we are actively engaged with organisation where apps are trialled elsewhere so that we can benefit from this thinking and research. One of the advantages of an app in the community is its ability to be involved in finding and contributing to solutions. You can continue to do this by signing up to the existing community monitoring tool that you can find on the website. This tool began as a way to find out who in the community is suffering with symptoms no matter how mild. It was also invaluable for us, providing insights into the information and support you were lacking, so we could provide it, and led, for example, to us extending our support to single-owner businesses. It will continue to be developed and aligned to the phases of the exit strategy, and it will allow us to gather data on your thoughts on things like mental health, economic recovery, or indeed future travel expectations. The tool is easy to use and is your way of helping us to understand what the community needs. I would therefore continue to encourage you to sign up to that tool so that we can use it as a rich source of data and information. Lastly, I wanted to just touch on education, as we know the easing of restrictions for some businesses have brought a new set of challenges for some people who can now get back to work, but who can't yet send their children to school, as they're not on the essential worker list. I'm aware that there has been occasions where schools have come under increasing pressure for some parents who understandably want to get back to work. We appreciate it's really difficult, but the public health advice is that we must maintain the really low numbers of students who have been attending schools in recent weeks. While things have changed with some businesses, the position remains that only vulnerable students and the children of essential workers can attend schools, colleges and early year providers. The essential worker list hasn't changed. You can find it on the most recent business guidance on the website. The Committee for Education, Sports and Culture have started working now on plans to understand how we can return schools and when that might happen and how safely it will be to do so. As we enter week 3 of distance learning, I want again to thank education staff for the crucial role they have played in our response and particularly for supporting our key workers. Whether it's been keeping schools and early years providers open for vulnerable students and the children of essential workers, or quickly developing plans for distancing learning, staff have worked together to respond quickly to the needs of our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've suddenly realised I forgot to mention the bow tie which Dr. Brink committed me to wearing for Emmy and Harley, so they get 2 mentions, one the last one and one this one, just in case anyone was wondering. I did manage to find one. Rory.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Good afternoon. General policing and law enforcement responsibilities continue with high visibility patrols both here in Guernsey and in Alderney. We're also maintaining support and contact for the Sark Constable via our neighbourhood policing team. As in previous weeks, we have seen an increase in calls for service with respect to domestic incidents, and we've seen an increase in calls of about 30 to 40%. However, the numbers we are dealing with are very manageable by our organisation, and there's plenty of resource to help. And as I've frequently said, it is an essential journey if you need to leave home to report or seek help about domestic issues. Following our appeal for drivers to reduce speeds and be more responsible around the roads with them being less full of vehicles, I can report that we have seen a reduction in the number of motorists reported for speeding-related offences. However, in the past 7 days, we have dealt with 5 road traffic collisions, some of which involved injury, and a further 3 drink drivers for drink driving offences. As we come out of lockdown and the various sections that have been described, I do anticipate that crime may increase. You, the public, are our eyes and ears. So if you see it, please say it, report it, and allow us to sort it. Please use either Crime Stoppers or the GBA drug line on 0800 318 318. My final point is with respect to Liberation Day. Liberation Day to us all is about freedom. It's about the fact that we live in a society that respects difference and we enjoy the rights and entitlements that many around the world simply don't have. However, 2020 is going to be different. For we see as a community we're fighting the threat that could still impact significantly upon our health and well-being and further damage to our economy if we lose the gains that we've made, which have been outlined this afternoon. So we must take a different approach to Liberation Day 2020, and we do that as a community. I know that some people are planning celebrations involving neighbours, friends or family. The guidance is very, very clear. You stay within your bubble. You do not lose the gains that we have made by breaching the guidance and rules that we are all subject to. We want you to enjoy the day, but it has to be done safely, and you stay within your bubble. There will be some further guidance coming out later in the week with regard to Liberation Day, but law enforcement will be out there on Liberation Day ensuring we as a community stick to the rules that we all have to keep everybody safe. If you're planning house parties, barbecues and events that will break the law, we will be there to deal with it. There's a large number of virtual events for Liberation Day being planned, and I would encourage everybody to look at liberationday.gg, but also the wider media who are publicising what these virtual events are for that special day. And finally, a big thank you and a shout out from all the blue light services to those who've sent very kind gifts to us, from hot food to cakes. It's very, very much appreciated, and that's also from the Chief Ambulance Officer and the Chief Fire Officer. Thank you to everyone who's been very kind and generous to us, and also to staff at Health. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Rory. We're conscious that we've had quite a long introduction today because there's been a lot of really important material to cover. So we may actually, depending on the number of questions, actually extend beyond our normal hour for those that are preparing and watching at home. I'm going to kick off. We also have some questions that came through the appeal to the public, the coronavirus appeal questions, which were sent, and Rob Moore is going to ask those on behalf of those, so we'll interweave those as well. But I just want to ask an obvious question that somebody out there will be thinking, and it probably initially for Dr. Brink, but I'm sure Heidi will have a view as well. Nikki, you said that we've now had no new positives for 5 days. We're down to 16 active cases. Within a couple of weeks, all being well, we could have no evidence or not identified any active cases or positive cases. Why don't we just leap straight to phase 4 or 5? Why do we have to go through all of this? Could you just explain the rationale if there's no evidence of any cases on the island?
Well, I think we've got to be careful as we move forward, because we know about the people we've tested, but for example, just over the last 24 hours, I've had some intelligence from my clinical colleagues that they're a bit worried about some respiratory tract infections. So we can't be absolutely sure. We need to be sure that we're actually on top of this. So one of the things that we're looking at not only is in keeping on with our current testing, and what's really good is that I've heard about this literally this morning. We'll test those people, so I'll know where we stand by this afternoon, this evening. So we've got really rapid analysis of where we are. So until we're absolutely sure that we don't have any more community cases, what can then happen is you can just start the whole process again. And if you look at data from around the world, what they say to you is don't retreat back out of lockdown, or don't progress out of lockdown too quickly, because you'll just then end up with a seesaw going backwards and forwards. So what we've done is we've written quite a conservative framework, but with the absolute knowledge that if things continue looking as good as they are, in all likelihood we'll go faster. The other thing that's going to help us a lot is BETS, which is the Bailiwick Extended Testing Scheme. And I know Deputy St Pierre mentioned that, but that's a really exciting project where we're going to ramp up our testing even more. And not only are we going to test symptomatic people, but we're going to look at cycling around the island into various groups and offering them testing and get a good population prevalence of what's going on in groups. Now that's important because you also then detect asymptomatic infections. So we know that the asymptomatic infections are perhaps 30% from the reported studies. So we'll be able to not only get any symptomatic infections, but also detect any asymptomatic infections. We're particularly looking at starting at groups who have higher risk activities, so carers going into homes, care homes, frontline health and care workers. So we're mapping out all of that and then going to engage with the various groups to work out how we can roll that out. But that is significantly increasing our testing up to possibly 300-400 even more a day. So that's the type of level we're looking at. So it's a very, very big project that we're doing, a very exciting project.
Great, thank you, Heidi.
I'll just kind of add to this, and Nikki will correct me if I'm wrong, but the aim has never been to stop the virus. The ability to stop the virus, I think, would be a forlorn hope. It was always about managing the virus in the community. And so if we just said, right, overnight, well, that's fine, we haven't had any cases for 5 days, let's open it all up, immediately we get rapid spreading throughout the community, and then we would be back to square one. So that's why we need to control it. So Nikki and her team can manage that release out of lockdown to the extent that we're all happy with that we are controlling things. And so each phase will be based on, are we still in control? Yes, we are. Let's move on.
Yeah. And it'll be linked with, at the moment we identify a case, it's quarantine and contact trace around the case. So it's stopping that exponential spread of the virus. So you try and get it at the first transmission level. So it's really important that we do that really rapidly.
Great. Okay, let's open it up to questions. Who'd like to start?
I'll go first if you like. Helen Bowditch from the Guernsey Press. A question for Chief Officer Mr Hardy, first of all. You said in your update statement there that you were anticipating that crime would increase as we ease out of lockdown. Do you mind giving us a bit more of your thinking behind why you think that's the case?
Well, certainly during lockdown, it's decreased significantly. So as people have their freedoms back, people are able to move, businesses, etc., begin to open, it is highly likely that crime will increase. That could be acquisitive crime, whether that's theft, opportunist crime. Those are all the sorts of things we keep an open mind, and it's about preventing that crime, and it's making a very clear message that law enforcement is out there trying to get ahead of that particular curve before it takes off. So I can't be specific, but certainly we know about drug supply and those sorts of offences, which we've continued to work on throughout the period of lockdown. But the whole variety of crime could potentially start to increase again, and our role is to prevent it, and if it does take place, address it.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Ewan.
Ewan Duncan from BBC Guernsey. Probably a question for you, Dr. Brink. In Jersey's press conference on Friday, they actually had said that by their easing of the lockdown plan will inevitably mean that more people will end up in hospital and there'll be an increased number of deaths. Nothing you've said this morning would indicate you feel that way, but could something similar happen in Guernsey?
So I said, this is not a risk-free process. It's not a risk-free journey. What we're doing is looking at trying to mitigate that risk as much as we can. So that is, we have thought very in great detail about the consequences of easing lockdown, because you are going to have increased ability for the virus to get transmitted, which is why we want to bring in the BETS programme, which we think will be operational in about 8 weeks. So it's about 6 weeks to instrument procurement. It'll take us about 2 weeks to standardise and do the high volume sample handling. But what we're doing is we're mapping out the whole programme now, so when we get the piece of equipment, we'll be good to start going straight away. So that will hopefully enable us to minimise transmission. So we're trying to, again, our strategy has always been to try and push this back to the community and get on top of any community transmission as quickly and as early as we can. So one of the reasons why we want this enhanced testing strategy is to enable us to try and manage any infections very quickly. And we're now down to just over, most cases we're actually under 24 hours from the time the person has a sample to from the time we tell them their result. Now, if you look at a lot of the contact tracing programs, they'll say, well, if you get them within 48 hours, you're doing well. Well, we're aiming to get everyone within 24 hours, and that'll hopefully then mitigate any risk and impact on the hospital, but it's never going to be risk-free.
I think we have to understand, remember, why we went into lockdown in the first place. It was because we had that evidence of unexplained community seeding, but also because we couldn't rely on the testing. We just weren't getting the testing results that we wanted and weren't getting them soon enough. So that's why we had to lock down, squash the infection, and that put us back in control. Now in control, we can ease off. And yes, there might be more cases, but this is about being in control of those cases, knowing where we are with them, and saying, well, is this fine? Is it balanced, or is it going out of control again? And then easing off it and reversing where we've been. But we don't expect that if we've got the BETS testing in place, which is going to be fantastic when we get it.
It's very exciting.
Okay, we'll go to Rob Moore for a question from the public.
Yeah, so these are questions that have come through on the My Coronavirus questions since we invited them at the last briefing, and one of the most popular topics is the extended bubbles that we're now seeing as part of phase 2. So a couple of questions on that. Firstly, for those who are shielding, do they need to continue shielding while those household bubbles are extended? This person says early on it seemed there was an estimate that shielding would be something that would happen for 12 weeks, and is that still the case? And then also on bubbles, what's the rationale behind expanding them for people to do things within their house or in their home, but not out in their community as part of their exercise or their walk?
Nikki, do you mind?
Yeah, okay. So with regard to the shielding question, I've personally taken quite a few calls on that. What I'm saying to people who are shielding is have a discussion, the person who's actually shielding, have a discussion with their doctor, because people are shielding for a variety of reasons. Now, for some people, staying isolated for 12 weeks is incredibly difficult, and the social connectivity, which I referred to earlier, is of paramount importance. So what I'm saying is, and as I say, I've discussed this with several people now, is have a discussion with your doctor. Your doctor will know how immunosuppressed that person is, how at risk there is, and then sit down and you can make a risk assessment together. But the people who are shielding are at most risk of the serious consequences of COVID-19, and I think that's really important. So we've rather been saying no to everyone. We've been trying to do a sort of, well, let's work out where you are and have a discussion about that. And we've managed to work through most of the cases that way. Sometimes what happens, in the GP then phones us to have a further discussion, and we're very happy to engage on that. So it's, I would say, an individual assessment. So that's the first thing. The second part of your question was why bubbles at home and not in the community. It's simply about the number of people moving around the community. So what we want to do as we ease out of lockdown is we want to do the balance of getting the economy going, getting people back to work, increasing social connectivity, and also improving people's recreational life. So we're trying to do all three of those together. What we don't want to do is suddenly open everything and then we'll have huge amounts of activity around the bailiwick. So it's really just managing volumes outside of the house and preventing those contacts occurring.
Can I just add, just so as it's clear to people, because I know there have been a few questions we've had, people thinking that you can bubble with another household one day and then another household the next. No, you decide who you're going to bubble with, and they are your bubble. You have formed one extended bubble. You can't form another extended bubble the next day. But hopefully, as I say, this might only be for just over 2 weeks, and we can grow our bubbles even bigger.
A question? Yes.
Laura Clayton, Bailiwick Express. A couple of questions for Mr. Hardy. One relating to bubbles, and you mentioned Liberation Day, and I've heard, and it sounds like you've heard as well, that people are perhaps planning events in estates or close or where there's a communal area, perhaps from their own driveways or their own front gardens. Are we saying that that's not allowed? Are there strict rules that is not allowed under these bubble guidelines?
The rules are around social distancing. The rules are about keeping you and your bubble safe. And I'm aware of information similar to clearly you are, that people are planning perhaps to come onto their driveway, their friends from opposite come onto their driveway. Providing you maintain a distance, providing you are not exchanging food and drinks, you stay within the confines of your bubble and you do not go across the road and meet your neighbours. That is not a breach of the regulations. The problem is that when people potentially start drinking and behaviours change, that is the danger. And we've tried to get across is we've given up so much and we put such an effort in to get to where we are and see the positive results. We don't want Liberation to be the chink in that armour that takes us back into lockdown or takes us back into delaying all the phases that we're talking about. So people have done really well about engaging. People understand what it's about now, I think. It's about social distancing, not having contact, not allowing that virus to spread. So if you're 10, 15 metres apart from your neighbours across the road for an hour and you exchange a bit on Liberation Day, there's not a lot I can physically do under the law about that. But you mustn't take risks. You mustn't push the boundaries because that will just put us back. I don't know, Dr. Brink, is anything further?
Yeah, we're actually going to, we've also had queries through the public health inbox, and we're going to produce some guidelines for Liberation Day. And again, I don't have problems people in their front garden waving to the person opposite, that's fine. But as long as it doesn't then go into a street party. So street parties are no-no because you'll then just have everyone mixing. But we want people to try and be able to celebrate as safely as they can. So we're going to produce specific guidelines. And I'm looking at Rob Moore. I think you're planning to put those out tomorrow or the next day.
But it would be a terrible irony for a few hours of fun on Liberation Day for us to end up having to go back a stage. So I think that's a real word of caution that goes back to, however good the statistics look right now, we still cannot be complacent. So, sorry. Any other questions? Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, just about the new Cleveland website TV News. Just about the new testing system, which, as you mentioned, Dr. Brink, is perhaps 300 to 400 a day once it comes in. Is there a possibility you might actually be able to test everyone on the island, or is that unrealistic?
We are, in the first instance, we're going to focus on particular groups of individuals. We might then progress that out to a population-based survey. But we're going to focus the first sort of like at least 6 weeks on cycling through health and care workers, the various other frontline staff, so ambulance workers, so going through all of those groups, community workers that visit people in their homes. So we're trying to look at the areas that we think are particularly vulnerable in the first instance and see if we have any infections in those areas. So that's what we do in the first instance. The second phase, we have discussed a wider community-based prevalence, so a bit like what Iceland did. So Iceland did that quite effectively, and we're looking at that as a possibility. Linked to that, we've also been doing some work on samples. At the moment, it's a throat swab and a nose swab. We're looking at the use of salivary samples as well. So there is some data that came out from Yale on that. And that obviously would be much easier technically just to get someone to spit in a pot rather than have to actually take the swab. So we're linking that to what type of sampling we do as well. So, and we think that we're going to be needing to do this for months to come, and it's a way that we could test our island back into normality.
Okay, we'll go to Rob and then we'll go to you. Rob.
So another question related to today's topic that has come through the My Coronavirus questions is off-island travel, and particularly travel between the bailiwicks, so travel to Jersey, and people are obviously following kind of developments there. So one person says they're seeing lots of talk online about Jersey lifting its lockdown and wanting travel between the islands to recommence. Is there something that's being considered? Another similarly asks if that link will remain closed, and if Jersey has travel to Guernsey and also has open borders, will that be a way for people to ultimately come to Guernsey?
I'll kick off, and I'm sure I'll have a view. I mean, my view is it's very premature to be thinking in that way at this stage. I mean, clearly this idea of increasing the size of the bubble, if we get to the stage, as Heidi said, of having a bailiwick bubble, then the obvious next question is, well, could it be a Channel Island bubble? So I think it's a valid question to be asking, thinking about. But I think to reach any kind of conclusion on that just yet, when Jersey clearly is it's not necessarily in the same stage, it's not necessarily applying the same exactly the same processes and strategies we are. As we've always said, every jurisdiction must develop its own strategy for itself. So we know, for example, that Australia and New Zealand are talking about creating an Australasia bubble across the Tasman Sea. So I think, again, it's a question of watching to see what we can learn from others and keeping it under review. But understandably, people are trying to think ahead and think about what their options might be for travel later in the year. But I would just urge a little bit of caution on that until we get a bit more clarity over the next few weeks. But others may have.
Yeah, I think it's all about the prevalence of infection in the neighbouring jurisdictions, and I think it's back to the science and the evidence is what's going on in the neighbouring jurisdictions and what risk do they pose. So I go back to what's the evidence, what's the risk, and let's make our decisions on that. So I don't think it's necessarily a specific jurisdiction. I think it's more generic what's going on in the jurisdictions around us and what risks do they pose.
Okay, it's coming up to 2, but we'll go on for another 10 minutes or so if there are enough questions. So, Ewan.
Just a similar question on travel for you, Dr. Brink. Supposing medical advice changes and you might be able to drop the 2-week self-isolation, which period or which phrase would that come into? And also, how would that play into what the tourism season might look like? Could it mean that people could travel by air, or would boat be the preference? How would people come to the island?
I think with regard to travel would come in later, as we've said. And the reason being is at the moment we're surrounded by jurisdictions with high levels of activity. We fought hard to get where we have. The island has sacrificed a lot to get where we are. So I think it goes back to what is going on in those jurisdictions and doing a risk assessment. So very similar to what I said to Rob, is that it's a risk assessment of what risk do they pose. Now, if you dial back to where we were at the beginning of March, is all of our infections were either travel-related or contacts of travel-related infections. So that was what we were seeing at the beginning of March. And if you look at our trajectory at the beginning of March, that wasn't an optimistic picture. So really important. So I think we would look at the risk that it posed rather than trying to put it into a specific timing. And again, if someone's risks decrease dramatically, we might say it's reasonable to consider that.
Okay, any more questions? Yes, Rosie.
Rosie Allsop, Island FM. I wanted to ask about liquor licensing. Liquor licences run from the 1st of June to the 31st of May. At the moment, we don't know whether pubs and licensed trades will be able to open. Has dialogue taken place with members of the trade to discuss contingencies, or are they just going to be expected to renew as normal?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a question I'll deal with. There has been dialogue. It's a matter for the Committee for Home Affairs. They're certainly recognising that actually nearly all businesses that have a licence are unable to trade at the moment, and even those that are able to trade do clearly have a cash flow problem, as of course many other businesses do, just because of the state of the economy whilst we're in this phase. So I think that dialogue is ongoing, recognising that issue, and but it's something that the Committee for Home Affairs are dealing with. I don't know if you've got any other comments.
No, I think that's right. It's been picked up and only discussed today, so it is ongoing in regard to the considerations around liquor licence.
Very much recognising the pressures that sector is under. Yes.
I know you've tried to sort of head this one off already, but every single day of a lockdown means more damage to businesses. It means more risk to people's livelihoods. And you've outlined for us that you've got 16 active cases. The borders are shut. I think there's very few cases in hospital. Are you absolutely convinced that your data is proportionate to this lockdown? Because it sounds like it's going to last for weeks. And I wonder if the public mood has sort of influenced the decision at all. I just want to know, really, are you convinced that this is proportionate?
Can I just start, and then I'll hand over to Nikki, who can give you all the evidence to explain exactly why. Yeah, and it is, at the end of the day, this is about the evidence. We don't know what will happen as we ease out of the lockdown. It's about seeing where we are as we go along. There might be cases of coronavirus that we don't know about, but the more we start bringing in business as normal and we start businesses working, we improve that the social bubbles and household bubbles are mixing more and more. We'll then find out whether that seeding is in the community or not, and then we'll have to consider. We'll then find out whether we can go faster. It's not knowing at the moment. We can only test what we know that's presented to us. We've got to then, that's why the testing is going to be so important, to understand whether we are right or whether we can say, right, next week we can open.
Anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely so, is that we will be flexible as we move forward, but we need to also be careful. We have been 5 days virus with no new cases. We're not yet virus-free, and I think we have to be careful as we move forward. But if we continue the way we're going, it is certainly possible that we will move faster. What we don't want to do is say that we're going to move very fast and then and then everyone prepares for that, and then we have to pull back because we suddenly have a cluster of cases. So it's that open, honest dialogue, as this is where we are. We might well go faster, but this is what we think is something that we can deliver on. If we do really well, it could go faster.
Yeah. I've learned in business, don't overpromise and underdeliver. We're saying that we have taken a cautious approach throughout this. We haven't promised what we can't deliver. We've said this is what we think. If we can bring things in sooner, we will, but we're doing it in a measured way and from the evidence that Nikki and her team's providing.
And I just want to pick up on the last part of your question in relation to the role of public sentiment and public opinion, because it is really important, and that we said in one of these events, however many weeks ago, before we even went into lockdown, that we needed to pick the right time to do that, because if we go in too early, you don't carry the public with you, and if you go in too late, then you've missed the opportunity to do what we've done, which is to get a real grip and a real control. And that's clearly what you've seen in other jurisdictions, that they've gone in too late and have paid the price of going in too late. But equally, coming out, we also do need to carry the public with us, and as Dr. Brink has said, that's all about the open and honest dialogue, and that's of course clearly what very much what these briefings are about, to really ensure that the public are as fully informed as they can be as to the rationale for the decisions and the direction of travel, so that they have confidence that of the decisions that have been taken by the government on their behalf. But it is very much, as Heidi said earlier, it is a partnership. It does take two to dance in that sense, and that actually, as we've touched on before, the enforcement that Rory has to do as head of law enforcement, principally, given limited resources, it is about consent. Policing is policing with consent of the community. So it is relevant, and that's why having a constant flow of information is really critical, and also worth re-emphasising again that if things can change, they will change, and we will advise the public of that as soon as we can.
Can I just add one point? It's a practical point and a real fact. Within my organisation, things have gone very, very well with regard to keeping the virus out of my staff, despite some of the work they're having to do on the front line. But about 10 days ago, we had an incident where an officer became unwell, and very, very quickly, an entire team had to be quarantined, taken out of their frontline duties for their protection, obviously to ensure we didn't pass it on to anybody else. And from literally a position of strength where we had a very, very limited amount of sickness in the organisation, on the advice of public health, we were suddenly facing a situation where a particular team was down to about 20-30% of its ordinary strength. And I think that shows how quickly this can actually impact on businesses, services, and what we're doing in sort of the frontline blue light services. So just to support what Dr. Brink's saying, if we allow things to go too quickly, we will lose it very, very quickly, and you have to wait for that evidence, and that's on personal experience. Fortunately, now that we've got through that, and with very quick testing, we've got staff back to work and we've got control of the situation, but that could happen across the bailiwick, and it could happen very quickly if we're not in control.
Okay, we'll do three more quick questions. One here, then we'll go to Rob, and then finally to Laura.
In the exit strategy, it says there could be tailored measures for some of the smaller islands, Alderney and Sark. What could those look like, and could we actually see an instance where perhaps some of these smaller islands are into phase 5 whilst Guernsey's still in phase 4?
Well, we haven't decided what that extra guidance will be for Alderney and Sark. That will be a separate element of the framework. This is what we've produced today, is the overarching frameworks, and then we'll be slotting in other aspects like the schools, as I said, and what we're doing with health and care services. I can't tell you what it will look like for Alderney and Sark. I mean, there are the borders up between Sark and Guernsey at the moment, and that's of Sark's choosing. And with Sark, things might change. It might change because of the makeup of that island, but it has to be in dialogue. We need to work together, and that's what we plan to do to get it right for both islands.
Okay, thank you. Rob?
Final my coronavirus question for today, and we've had a lot of this question come through about the activities that we can do recreationally now. This is about recreational motorcycling, which has come up a lot, so I'll just ask one of the questions on it. This is from someone who says, I'm retired, and one of my main interests is owning, rebuilding and riding motorcycles. As one of the many motorcycle enthusiasts in the island, I would like to ask if we can be permitted to use our motorcycles for recreational outings. These could be restricted to very small groups, and social distancing would be adhered to at all times. Is that okay?
Thank you. So motorbiking, I would say two motorbikers can go out together, and obviously respecting the appropriate social distancing and so on. I think that's entirely reasonable. I've had lots of motorbikers contact me as well, and so I've been thinking about it a lot over the last 24 hours. So I think two people going out together with the appropriate social distancing, absolutely fine. Large motor groups is a no for now.
Okay, final quick question from Laura for the day. Thanks.
Okay, back to the evidence that you were discussing just before, actually. I mean, I've been reading that in France, doctors there are claiming the virus has now been detected through blood samples they've been holding since December. And obviously we've got close links with France, you know, people were going skiing over the winter and stuff like that. Is there any evidence that actually the virus was present in Guernsey before we currently know? And will we ever be able to find out? Will the BET scheme perhaps show the historical prevalence?
So BETS won't, because it's detecting current infections, so it's not an antibody test. So that's the first thing. I've also looked at the case in France from December. I can't find the original scientific data on it. There are lots of things on social media and so on. I think there are a number of explanations for that. It could have been an introduction of a case which just burnt out if someone became unwell and stayed at home, apparently infected the 2 children but not their wife. So it's possible that it was a small cluster that burnt itself out. So that's one possibility. The second possibility is that the methodology we use uses a highly sensitive technology in the form of polymerase chain reaction, so it'll detect a single copy of the virus. And so one has to wonder if that sample was taken and stored appropriately for molecular technology, because otherwise it could potentially get contaminated by any subsequent samples. So that's a possibility. I'm not casting any aspersions or anything, but that's something else you'd ask. What I would be doing is going and trying to do antibody testing on that cluster of cases, because I think that would give you some conclusive proof or not. So a cluster that burnt itself out or a laboratory issue, I think further testing is needed to differentiate which one it was. With regard to Guernsey, we didn't have any unusual respiratory activity over that period of time, so there was nothing that highlighted to us that we were having a funny flu season or we were having unexplained respiratory symptoms. So we weren't having any reports of it at that stage. But we do our flu surveillance, our weekly flu surveillance over that period of time. So when we saw that report, what we're just going to do is go back and superimpose our respiratory activity over previous years just to see if there's any difference. So we're having a look at that. You didn't expect me to not want to look into that one, did you?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Media, isn't it?
Yes,
So,
yeah.
thank you.
It's going back to the original article and trying to find out what the data is.
Thank you.
Perfect timing as well, so thank you, Dr. Brink. Okay, well, that brings today to a close. Because of the bank holiday, we will be meeting again this week on Thursday at 1 p.m. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.